talk on this Friday, February 12th. That is right, February 12th, which means in 2 days it is February 14th, and you know what February 14th is? It is Valentine's Day. So I'm hoping that you will, I didn't wear red today. That's not officially Valentine's Day. Mike. Okay, so you hearing me now? Are you hearing me now? It's very muffled. Okay. Okay. I feel like I'm a Verizon commercial. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Okay. Great. We're okay. Of course, the collar looks like crap, but that's okay.
But the sweater looks great.
The sweater looks great. The colors look great. Okay, so we're going to talk about marriage because it's Marriage Week. It's National Marriage Week. We're going to talk about love. We're going to talk about why we seem to be getting the whole idea of marriage a little bit wrong. I mean, it doesn't matter who you are. I mean, we're just not staying married as long, and a lot of kids are being born out of wedlock. It's really worse in the African American community. There are a lot of issues that around marriage. And so we're going to talk about that. We can talk about other things too, because I'm also working on a story about Iran's nuclear ambitions and whether this prophecy about the 12th Imam can be tied to it, and why the U.S. may, I know you're shaking your head, we don't know, why the U.S. should probably pay more attention to this. But anyway, I want to introduce our guests today. Because they're all stacked about people who can talk about marriage, about human relations, about all that kind of stuff. And soon I'm going to get a computer where you can actually mail in a lot of your thoughts about love and about marriage and about why you think we're not doing it right. And why we should be doing it better and how we can do it better. All right, to my right is Chuck Stetson, the very serious guy over there. Smile, Chuck. Okay, Chuck Stetson. He's the chairman of Creating the Better Hour. What is the Better Hour? What is that about?
The Better Hour actually comes from a film that I did for public television, which was picked up by PBS Home Video. It was on William Wilberforce, the legacy of William. Was called The Better Hour, the legacy of William Wilberforce. It was about how 200 years ago, just William Wilberforce and about 10 of his friends changed all of England without a lot of money, essentially without a lot of people, from a very self-indulgent and decadent world to a much more civilized world that eventually became Victorian England.
And part of William Wilberforce's mission was to end slavery in England.
He had two great objects. One was the abolition of the slave trade. Secondly was the reformation of manners, both of which he accomplished in his lifetime, which is rather remarkable.
How did he do that with the slave trade? I'm trying to do it in Sudan with a group on the slave trade, and it's virtually impossible.
Well, we have the new slavery. In 1807, he was able, after 20 years, to get the abolition of the slave trade. So he divided it into two parts. Get rid of this trade itself, and then get rid of the institution of slavery, which was passed in July of 1833, just as he was dying. Now it's kind of come back, and it's come back in force, and it's come back in different ways, and that's clearly a thing that we need to focus on today. But freeing the slaves was a big deal in all of the British Empire, and again, it was done by 10 people, and not a lot of money. So there's great hope to really do things, and so maybe some of the efforts that you're doing in Sudan, you can have an impact like Wilberforce.
Yeah. Okay, and that's Chuck Stetson. We know what you're about now. Dr. Dale Archer, psychiatrist at drdalearcher.com.
Yes.
And
not serious. No.
You're a veteran of the strategy room, so people that I've introduced you anymore.
No.
As is Ellen Ratner, who is Chief Talk Radio News.
Right.
Bureau Chief of Talk Radio News. Yeah. So
we actually are doing. You can follow us on Twitter with is it Political Blog? I think it's Political Blog on Twitter, and you can check with us, and we'll get it up, and people can figure out what we're doing all around the country.
All right. Okay. Great. And then to my right is Dr. Jennifer Morris. She's head of the Ruth Institute, and Dr. Morris is here by chance because of the snowstorm in New York. She couldn't get out on her flight on Wednesday, I think it was.
That's right.
And so I'd asked her on Tuesday night, hey, do you want to come be on the strategy room? She goes, no, got a flight out Wednesday, can't be with you. I got a call saying, hey, you know what? I'm not leaving till Friday after that. That spot's still open. I said, come on down, we can talk about it. What is the Ruth Institute?
The Ruth Institute is a nonprofit that I founded about a year and a half ago, and our mission is to promote lifelong married love to college students. And I think there are two big issues that we're concerned about. One is the intellectual climate on campus, where there's really a lot of hostility to the very idea of marriage, and the institution of marriage comes under a lot of kind of academic and intellectual attack. even though there's a ton of sociological evidence that suggests that marriage is a good thing and good for individuals. You live longer, you accumulate more wealth, and lots of good things are associated with marriage. And it's an important social good as well, which is how I got interested in it as an economist, because my doctorate's in economics. So the academic part is one thing that we're very concerned about with the Ruth Institute. But the other part of the Ruth Institute is the social climate on campus. Even as we speak at Yale University, Sex Week is going on at Yale. And Sex Week is basically, institutionalized pornography, we believe that it makes a lot of sense for students to try to have some restraint sexually during their college years. And we work with some of the student abstinence clubs that are out there.
They have those?
There are student abstinence clubs.
You're certainly not hearing about them.
Well, there are. And you should get those kids on the air sometimes. You'd have a blast with them because they're really good, sensible.
I'd love to be on with them.
Down-to-earth kids, very down-to-earth kids. So
you don't believe in abstinence?
I believe in safer sex and careful sex and very rare, a lot of sex. Not a lot of sex, but I think the idea of college students being abstinent is unreality and is never going to happen.
But look at this as a student-led initiative.
I understand.
It's a student initiative.
It's all tied to religion, and I don't think it's tied
so
to
what?
it. Yeah, well,
so what if it's tied to religion?
I understand,
If the
but I
religious
just think
students
it's
are the
not
only
realistic.
ones, if those religious students are the only ones who can say, this is the objective that I set for myself, and I plan to live up to this objective, and if I fail, my friends are going to come alongside me and help me. If only the religious students figure out that this is a good idea, well, so much the worse for the non-religious students.
I mean,
honestly.
That's a good idea.
Really?
Yeah,
You think cohabiting in the dorms is an okay thing? You think the hookup culture is okay?
There's a difference between a sexual relationship between adults who are in their 20s, 21, 22, that uses contraception and cohabitating with somebody. It's on a continuum, and I don't think that...
And okay, let's say you're right, that there's a continuum. Of course there's a continuum. So we're just arguing about where on that continuum to be. So what's the problem with saying, I want to be at the corner?
10% of the people, because my view, and I was a therapist at one point, but my view is that if you only wait till marriage for a sexual relationship, there's a very good chance you're not going to necessarily have such a hot marriage. Because I think people need to do some of that exploration. I do.
Well, I don't know about that because I've never been married, so I don't know. But I also believe that people get married on the premise that they have great sex, and so we're going to get married thinking the marriage is going to be great because they're so hot and heavy for each other. They don't stop and develop the relationship before they have sex, and so they get married on the wrong premise that they're compatible because they're having sex. They bonded on a very, very emotional level.
You couldn't have said it. I mean, you took the words right out of my mouth. I completely agree with that. And that's one of the problems with love at first sight. And talking about chemistry and talking about the magic and talking about the huge emotional rush. All those things are great when you fall in love, absolutely. But the problem is they blind you to the fact that, you know what, really in the grand scheme of things, we aren't that compatible. And you don't figure that out until well down the path.
And having no sex is...
Let me finish. So I think that philosophically, abstinence at least needs to be discussed. It needs to be brought up. It needs to be talked about on college campuses and elsewhere. Not to say that we're going to change the world, everyone's going to become abstinent, but I think just saying that, it's not real and it's never going to happen is a very short-sighted view. So at least it needs to be discussed. If for nothing else, in the context of the fact that we talk about love and that fluttering heart and all those things that go along when you meet someone, you meet your soulmate. The reality of the situation is, how can you have love at first sight? How can you fall in love with somebody when you know nothing about them except the fact that you see them and there's a physical attraction? So I think that it needs to be in the discussion.
Why don't we look at the data, though? I'm a business guy. I make investment on behalf of our investors, institutional investors, and I don't make a move without knowing the data. Mm-hmm. The data is that since the sexual revolution of the 1970s, we've gone from 78.6% of people that were married down to 57%. That's a 30% decline. We are actually headed, and my concern is really civil society. I believe that we are headed for an earthquake. An earthquake, just as we've been seeing Haiti and the like, the structure's all crumbled. We are having marriage crumbling all around us. We are headed for another Haiti for democracy and freedom. That's my concern. And I was up with the senior venture capitalists up in Boston last September, and I said, what could crush us collectively and individually? Marriage. They were stunned. But that's true.
Well, let's look at some of the other data. I actually have the marriage index here.
Oh, boy.
From the Monitoring the Nation's leading marriage. Oh, she brought hers. Okay. Look at that. But it is incredibly eye-opening what the statistics show. That from the 5 leading indicators, we have gone from, in 1970, 76.2% to 60.3% in 2008. Let me read you some of the indicators. Percentage of adults married ages 20 to 54.
Oh.
In 1970, it was 78.6%. Now, in 2008, it's 57.2%. That's a 20 point, more than 20 point.
Almost 30.
Almost 30. 30? That's
No.
right. 20.
Yeah, that part is 20.
That part is 20.
Oh, 20.
Percentage of marriages intact, the first marriages intact. In 1970, it was 77.4. In 2008, it was 61.2. But actually, the 61.2 is a little rise from 1990. So there was actually some improvement. Now, this is the part that really just gets me. It says percentage of births to married parents in 1970 was 89.3%. So much the norm. And then in 2008, 60.3%. Now, as an African American, this is the statistic that really, really frightens me. Among African Americans in 1970, the percentage of married adults aged 20 to 54, 70.3%. In 2008, 39.6%. The percentage of births to married parents, this is African Americans, in 1970, 62.4%. In 2008, 28.4%. That means more than 70% of African American children are being born out of wedlock. Now, I want to get to you, Alan, because you're raising your hand. But Chuck, I mean, you were talking about the economics. What does that mean economically?
Here's the basic deal. We are now in a slide going the way Europe is. And if we go the way of Italy, let's peg it to healthcare. We've been talking about healthcare since last August. Okay, let's peg it to healthcare. All right. Italy has a 1.1 reproduction rate. That means, by definition, they're going to have half of the workforce in the next generation. They're going to be supporting 2 times the number of people over 65 because people living longer and the baby boomer bulge. That is, by definition, a 4-fold increase in healthcare. If healthcare today is 18% of our GDP, our economy, what's it going to be as a percentage in the future, in the next generation? It's going to be a bust. We cannot stand it. And what's going to happen is the government's going to step in, and it's going to be a total disaster. And the same thing is going to happen for pensions. And so we better get on this thing. Now, before the financial earthquake that happened in September of 2008, there were a few people, and I heard a couple of the people talking, but they didn't really get out there. That wasn't really broadly understood. And so September 2008 happened, and we almost brought down the whole world economics system.
But also, what happened in 2008, and this is another statistic out of the University of Virginia, they showed that actually created an environment by which people actually could have stayed together. There was more. Okay, we're going to go commercial. Wow.
Yeah, commercial.
There were more people thinking, we can't financially afford to split, so let's try to stabilize this relationship. Let's work on this.
Right.
But you know, that's not the way we'd like to keep marriages together by have a financial meltdown, of course.
But it's not just finances. It's just in tough times, the unit of a couple has more survivability. And so you tend to hunker down, you tend to stay with somebody who maybe it's not the best relationship, and you tend to form partnerships more.
I don't want to talk about people who it's not the best relationship. We can talk about relationships a little bit later, and when we come back from this commercial break. So we'll be right back with God Talk to each other, and we're talking about this in marriage. Think about what married people go through. You know, what happens behind closed doors, like, why are you here? Being not married, I have done a lot of research on marriage, hoping to actually solve that.
You're married.
Well, thank you. But you know, to a guy, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
No. I love to fix up people.
Really?
And I've done a very good job.
You've done very good? Okay. Now, Dr. Morris, you were talking about basically why we are in the situation we are. Why is marriage so difficult for us to kind of sustain in this kind of environment? I mean, is it an issue that we're much more individualistic? We don't really think in terms of group thing. We don't think in terms of a community. We don't think we're not a shame culture anymore. We're more of a individualistic. My goals, my needs. My honor is really what's at stake here.
Well, a lot of the things you said I would agree with. And in fact, the book that I wrote on this subject is called Smart Sex, Finding Lifelong Love in a Hookup World. And the whole theme of that book...
that sounds like a book on it.
The whole theme of that book was to deal with really the things that Dr. Archer was talking about, which is that I think part of the reason we're having trouble getting married and staying married is that we're doing a lot of things prior to marriage that are counterproductive and that are in our way. And so people are spending time at Yale doing hookup culture, and they're not all just having nice relationships. They're doing a lot of kind of debauched stuff, a lot of kind of spontaneous stuff, there's a lot of alcohol involved. And they're setting themselves up for failure. And then they don't realize 15 years later, gee, I want to get married, I want to settle down. And they don't realize that they've been thinking about sex in terms of me and my pleasure, and now sex has a bigger meaning. And sex is part of the married life. And it's not just about me and how I feel now. Now it's about it's about the two of us building something together.
And now for another opinion.
I want to say something.
But Ellen was just like...
Ellen's been just hot. She's been
There's a high wire. I had to let her go first.
Children living with their own married parents. It's gone 68.7 to 61. You would think, that's the destruction of our culture. But no, you know what? I grew up in the 50s where people had affairs on their husbands or wives, and unfortunately, because we don't have all these sophisticated telephone stuff, people couldn't check up on them, although everybody in the community knew about it.
Hit them with golf clubs.
Right. Yeah. Or a marriage is just terrible or abusive to the children, and the marriages stay together because of the social whatever. And you know what? I don't think that's right either, because we grew up with a lot of screwed up kids. And you can say, well, they turned out to be us in the 60s. Maybe so, because everybody had to have a father's knows best culture. And you know what? It didn't work.
Well, wait a minute. I grew up there too. My anecdotes are as good as yours, okay?
I'm also thinking that I also want to say about that culture is that because they did it because they had to, they didn't figure out why they had to. This is the difference. They got it wrong then too. And they got it right, but for the wrong reasons. You understand what I'm saying?
They couldn't talk about what was wrong. They didn't have a vocabulary for talking about why things weren't working.
With that.
Okay, and I think that was what made them sitting ducks for the sexual revolution, which wasn't the answer. The sexual revolution was not the answer to the problems of the 50s.
I need to get a computer here. Can we get the computer out? Because I want to see what people are talking
The
about.
sexual revolution was the birth control pill. I mean, that was the number one thing that caused that to explode. But, I just want to say that I just find it fascinating that people tend to come down on one side of this topic or the other without ever considering, the fact that all of these things need to be put into the equation. You can't just say that it's going to be all abstinence and nothing else, or it's going to be, free sex, free love, do whatever you want, and it's nothing else. All of these things need to be talked about, they need to be discussed, and they're not because of the rhetoric that goes along with it and the emotion that goes along with it. People tend to feel so strongly that they won't even consider any other option along the continuum. So I think that abstinence has really gotten lost in the shuffle in all of this, and it at least needs to be brought back into the equation, and the reasons why it has some value need to be talked about.
Chuck is raising his hand. I want to get to Chuck.
Yeah, this is National Marriage Week, and one of the things we're focusing on is the church. And the church has really let us down in this area, and that's why I'm focused on it, because if you do a survey, 28% of churches have a course on marriage. It should be 100%. Churches are still aware we get married here in the United States. Over 80% of people get married in churches or houses of worship. It's less than 50% in Italy. You have to go to town hall, and that's what people typically do there. And that's why they have a 1.1 reproduction rate. They're not focusing on the purpose of marriage. We're asking the churches to do two things. We're on God Talk here. We're asking them to do marriage preparation, including dating and courtship, going down to middle school, the high school, and colleges, and we're talking about marriage enrichment. And I've even talked to some pastors who have said, marriage enrichment, what are you talking about? Do you mean marriage repair, Chuck? No, I'm talking about marriage enrichment, where you enrich. My marriage has been very much enriched by going to some of these things. So I think there's a huge area that the church gets involved. There can be a lot of stuff, good stuff going on. We're a very religious country, at least according to the U.S. Supreme Court and Justice Douglas. Why don't we recognize that? Why don't we, in fact, do something? We are
okay,
you
made a very good point. 16 years old, you've got to take driver's education in order to get a driver's license.
Right.
Why doesn't anybody under 22 years old in this culture have to take a
amen.
course?
Amen.
That's what he's talking about.
Amen. I'm all for that.
We would just disagree what might be in it.
Yeah,
okay.
right.
Well, I mean, you brought a very important question that most people have a hard time answering, or this is the most incendiary, actually, element of what our marriage debate is. What is marriage for? Yeah. What is
I do not
marriage
think
for?
marriage is to have just children.
Okay.
Well, that's one of the reasons. You can't throw that out.
No, but I don't think it should be the sole reason that people partner up.
It doesn't have to be the sole reason.
But as individuals, we have a whole variety of reasons that we partner up.
Right.
If you look at it at the social level, then you've got a little bit different question there, and that is that as the social problem is to attach mothers and fathers to their children and to one another. That's an institutional structural problem, and that's what marriage is designed to do. And it's unique and it uniquely important for this reason. If you didn't need to do that job, if you didn't need to somehow attach kids to their parents and parents to one another, if you didn't have that job to do, you wouldn't need something like marriage.
No,
wait a minute. You can have friendships, you can have sexual relationships, you can have all kinds of things. But if you don't need to solve this problem, then the idea that you would have an institutional structure called marriage, I just don't think that's correct.
Marriage is a contract. It's a binding contract.
You know what? No, I don't believe that. And you know what? And
it is the Jewish religion.
my thing, and because I'm a very hot topic about this, about the issue of marriage and why I think she's correct, is because of what's happening in the black community. More than 70% of those kids are born out of wedlock. One of the cases of abuse you see in homes so many times are because it's from the parent who is not biologically connected with that child.
Child abuse in step parents is huge.
Exactly. Yeah. I'm just talking that this is a fact that we don't get. That does not get reported because I don't know. Is it not politically correct? Everybody should. Because marriage for today. This is why I'm observing that marriage. When I talk to young people, it's about. They want to be happy, and they look at marriage as this ultimate redemption, as this salvation of how they can be ultimately happy.
But you know what? When I was growing up, first of all, when I was growing up in 1970, the average marriage age for a girl was 20-point-some months. Now it's 25-point-some months. So there's really almost a 5-year difference. But girls in my era, we were the transition era. They always looked, if I got married, then happiness was going to happen, and that's how you have so many people of my generation who are divorced, because that's what we were taught.
Right, but now there's a backlash on that, and now the kids today are saying, you know what, wow, I look at my parents, and it sure didn't work out for them that way, so therefore, I am going to shun the entire institution.
Let's go back. Wait a sec. Let's go to the data. I'm a venture capitalist. I always look at the data, and the data is that fathers are necessary. Why? In case of boys, and I'm citing Brad Wilcox at the University of Virginia and the National Marriage Project, boys, if they don't have a mother and father, they have a 2 times greater incident of going to prison. We cannot build prisons fast enough. That was proved in California in August when a 3-panel judge says we're going to let 40,000 prisoners out of the 150,000, that's 27%, because we have overcrowdings. We know 67% are going to be back in 2 years. We're not solving the problem, and look who's in jails. It's a lot of the black community because they don't have fathers. Girls, let's look at girls. If a girl grows up with a father, she's got a 5% of teenage pregnancy. If the father goes by the age 6, it's a 35% incident of teenage pregnancy, a 7-fold increase. Kids need a father; they also need a mother, and that's what children need.
But no one here in this panel is saying that that's not good.
So let's keep the focus. If marriage isn't always about just happiness, it's about the children that we bring into the world. If we're not protecting the children, it's a real problem.
Marriages that physically cannot have children. They shouldn't be married. That's not the purpose. Look, and we know the data. You're a data guy. The data guy is that people who are with a partner, usually married, live longer, have better health problems. So it is not just about children.
Okay, we're talking about the biblical idea of marriage, and I do believe that the biblical idea of marriage is not so much about having children. That certainly is part of it. I mean, and Doctor, you can weigh in on this as well, but what I've heard, when you go back to Genesis, of course, Genesis covers both Jewish faith and the Christian faith. The idea was that each one was sort of half of the other. Each one had a complementary element to the other, and it was a helpmate, a companion. It wasn't that they were there to create, but that was a natural byproduct, because they each had to give up part of themselves in order to create. Right. And it's very interesting, even down to the gametes, the sexual material. The only time the cells actually sacrifice half of itself is through the act of creation, through the acts of conception, and that is it. That is, you need both halves of those opposites to create that. What the idea in Genesis is saying is that a man has strengths that a woman doesn't have, and a woman has strengths that a man doesn't have, and that the two together then complement each other to create a better union. That was the idea. Children are actually not mentioned in that, but the direction is he does say, be fruitful and multiply.
But that's where the science. But this is where the science goes. The science proves exactly that. If you need a mother and a father, if you don't have a mother and a father, look what happens to the kids. They're ending up in jail. We can't build jails fast enough. This is going to wreck democracy. Do we want to have criminals out in the street? That is where we're going. So we do have to focus on children.
There's a lot of things that are wrecking democracy, and frankly, you could look at those statistics and say it's mothers and fathers, and I will look at those statistics and I will say the reason we have so many people in jail is because we don't have any education, etc., between 0 and 4 years old.
And it's not, but we talked about.
That's the standard.
What happens between 0 and 4 years old? Kids are in their homes. They're with families. And where did I learn how to read and how to get things at home? At home. Children, my mother.
But you know what? Children of welfare families, be it black or white, hear something like 600 words a minute, an hour, and children from educated families hear like 2,000 or 3,000 words a minute. It has to do with stimulation. It has to do with development of the
and also it has to do with start having babies at age 13 or 14, because that's what's happening in the black community. And you can't. And when a 13 or 14-year-old has a child, of course they're going to have a lower vocabulary. But the problem is that the reason why that 13 or 14-year-old girl is having a baby because she has no father in the household. She has no relationship with the father.
That's just too easy. I mean,
that's one aspect of it, but I think it's very important to you can't
just say... No, but it's too basic. This is too basic a thing to throw out as a rug.
Because stable relationships breed stable children.
Exactly.
Period.
Thank you.
So it doesn't necessarily have to be that they're married, doesn't necessarily have to be any of that. All of those play a role, but at the end of the day, the kids that do the worst are the ones that come from dysfunctional families because they learn dysfunction as normal. That is their normal world, and when they get older, they end up
I'm risking my flight. I would like to speak.
Okay, go ahead. She's one risking her flight. She wants to speak.
I'm risking my flight here. I'd like to have a few minutes because you guys come back on this show once in a while. Look, what the data do show is that marriage is an independent factor, and so the idea that two grown-ups who happen to love each other, who live together, whether they're married or not, whether they're both the biological parent of the child or not, that is simply not true. We know very well that looking at poverty as an indicator, looking at race as an indicator, marriage trumps those indicators. It's quite striking.
I'd love to see that.
I will send it to you. If you are looking at propensity for violence, propensity for criminal activity, the percentage of unmarried families in the neighborhood affects what happens in the school. It's quite independently of income. It's quite.
I will agree with that only anecdotally because my sister teaches in an inner city school, and she tells all the time about these children who come from these dysfunctional families and how it weighs down on the academic process of the other students. She says she's got about 5 or 6 really good students, but then many of them come from these dysfunctional homes where they've got, many siblings from many different parents, fathers and combinations, and this is what they know is normal. They don't know stability.
Yes.
So I would agree.
And I would like to say something about the dysfunction term, okay, because the term dysfunction has come up here a couple of times, and it's actually been studied. If you ask the question, and this is just about divorce, not so much the unmarried childbearing thing that we're talking about, but the data on divorce is quite interesting, because if you ask the question, do kids do better if their parents stay married or not? Okay, the answer depends on the amount of dysfunction in the relationship. And so if you look at it and you say, if we've got a high conflict marriage, yes, those kids do better if their parents dissolve the marriage, okay? But if it's a low conflict marriage where the parents are just kind of not very happy or they're dissatisfied or maybe there's quarreling, if those marriages break up, the kids do much worse because it's an unwell. Okay, now the real data is what percentage of them fit into each of those categories.
So you have to define dysfunction.
Well, no, wait a second. These guys who've done this data, okay, we're usually looking at less than 30% of divorces are of the high conflict variety.
I'll agree with that.
And the real revolution in divorce law had to do with not how we treat the people who are beating each other up and stuff like that, because that would have always been grounds for divorce under a false system, right? The real revolution is, what do we do with the low conflict marriage? No-fault divorce says it's okay for the low conflict marriage to have a divorce, and the culture around us is saying that even if you have a low conflict marriage, if you're not happy, that's enough of a reason.
Part of it is the adultery laws.
That is the problem.
Part of it is the adultery laws. In almost every state of the union, adultery is not even a factor in a divorce.
Yes, that's what I'm talking about.
With their current live-in partner, having had an adultery. I mean, look at John Edwards.
He's getting married though.
But adultery used to be.
You want to know how bad that marriage was going to be? I'm going to project right now. John Edwards, you are going to have a lousy marriage with this Rael lady.
At least he has to acknowledge he has the kid now, right?
Under the fault-based system, you guys, under the fault-based system, adultery would have been grounds for divorce, and so the no-fault system has penalized the party that keeps the vows, and that's why we say that marriage isn't a contract anymore. Marriage is less than a contract.
It is a legally binding contract with an option to get out. But it is.
I could leave my husband because I don't like his breath.
But marriage,
I mean, I could live for any reason or no.
I'm tired, I'm depressed, I'm not satisfied. Let me read some of the emails because
we got a lot of good ones.
I know. We've been going through stuff like that. A lot of people think Ellen is right.
While you're reading the emails, can I just bring something else into it?
But I gotta read them out loud. Okay, let me just read them out loud. This is from Lori Linville. She says, I turned 18 in 1975. She says, during the sexual revolution, and I lived it. What a waste of time and effort. I thought at the time it empowered me as a woman, but now I know I was wrong. I wish young people would understand that they have to learn for themselves. Very important.
And I think that what she said is crucially important. Waste of time.
Yeah.
I mean, and she should go to ruthinstitute.org and get some support.
Ruthinstitute.org, yes. Okay, I can vouch for Ellen's examples of bad behavior from the past. However, she makes a fundamental error presuming that what we have today is an improvement over the past. Of course, I
didn't say it was an improvement.
It's just a different version of failure. Okay, Ellen is right. Team, what we are seeing these days is a correction in culture. If you listen closely to what Ellen said about toxic marriages that stayed together because they had to, these days people don't have to. Thus today's marriages are more potent and give a more true reading, even though they are less. I think that's a very good point, because what he's saying is that we don't have to stay together, but the institution of marriage is still powerful and it's still good. Now we have to figure out, why is it we're here? Why is it that we have to stay? Why is it that it's better? Okay. She said the church doesn't lead people down, but people don't want to dictate their lives. So this is true. Okay. Marriage is the closest thing. This is from whatever. Brenda. Okay, Brenda, marriage is the closest thing we can get to understanding God's relationship with us. I believe that this is one of the biggest purposes for marriage. But if you have a twisted view on God, then you will have a twisted view on marriage. Until you have a relationship with your Father, God, it will be very difficult to have a healthy, long-lasting marriage. As long as we're on God Talk, we can talk about this issue, because and he's raising his hand again. So, you want to talk about that issue?
Yeah, and
Okay, go ahead.
I want to put it.
Just go ahead.
I want to put it in a key context.
Okay.
We have now the taxpayer costs of divorce and unwed childbearing. We've been talking about anecdotal stuff. What does it cost us? We've had Brookings on the left. We've had Heritage on the right sign off on this thing. It costs at least $112 billion a year. Some say it's 150 to 170 billion. That is somewhere between $1 trillion and $2 trillion. The cost over a decade. It's the same cost we've been talking about in healthcare. You know, if the people knew about this, they get angry. One of the things that we're doing at the Institute for American Values as part of the Let's Strengthen Marriage campaign that we're doing this spring is focusing on divorce. We have 3 states that I can speak to, Maryland, Pennsylvania, and Illinois, that have wait periods for divorce. They have divorce rates that are 1/2 the states that have no wait. If we reduce the divorce rate by 50%, we'd be talking about $61 billion savings. When budgets at the state level are in deep trouble, this is a low-hanging fruit. If you're a legislator, would you want to raise taxes, or would you like to extend the waiting period on divorces? This is low-hanging fruit.
Yeah, and I think that's an important point, that, you know, people are emotional people, and as we've seen with Tiger and Elon, she was ready to kill him the night she found out, and would have killed him and would have sat and stewed for about the next few hours thinking, I'm glad I did. But, but as time went on, she started to soften a little bit. Now they've had meetings. The marriage is not definitely over.
Well, he's been treated for sexual addiction.
Well, part of the way he's being treated for sexual addiction is that Patrick Carnes has him in his own separate little way.
Yeah,
not
it's
even interacting
a
with
joke.
patients.
It really is.
Patrick Carnes, I love you, but
very
you are
poorly
not
done.
doing this guy a favor.
The issue about the God thing. This is something that is central to faiths, is that the relationship that we have in a marriage, the covenant of marriage, is supposed to be a reflection of this relationship with God. That it is only that this is from the church point of view, at least the Orthodox point of view, and this is something the church never really taught for years, that the relationship between a man and a woman is only cemented because each individually has a relationship with God, an outside source, an outside objective level of right and wrong that they can both adhere to. That they are not looking to each other to have a soul mate, because the human soul is not strong enough to bear the weight of another human soul. That is one of the issues surrounding marriage, and why it's so difficult to create a marriage, and that's why the hookup culture, or the third date rule in New York, as they call it. Do you know what that is? Yeah, I had a conversation with a friend of mine.
I know what that is.
If you're going out, a third date means you're going to have sex.
You're going to do it.
That's the third date rule in New York, and the problem is a lot of
heard of it.
Yeah.
Well,
You've been out of circulation.
You're not. Anyway, I want to read it because I think it's very interesting, is that what the culture, the secular culture, drives as the driving force of marriage, which is the Victoria's Secret, the sexual stuff, the sexy stuff. They call it making love when they're just having sex. They're really not making love. Love takes years to develop. That is the driving force of a lot of their marriages, when really what drives a marriage is something very totally different.
And I think that's very beautiful what you raise, really, because, and it hasn't been taught from the churches well enough, and since it's God talk, we can talk about it. But the thing that's beautiful about it is that it helps people to see that that there's something bigger in the marriage besides me and what I feel, and particularly bigger than me and what I feel right in this moment. And when you are able to take that broader view, that's one of the things that helps people sustain their marriage, and it helps people have happier marriages. The data I wanted to point out is that if we are talking about the fact that, we don't have to stay in bad marriages anymore, and this is a good thing because the bad marriages are all getting weeded out, you would think that the average person who is still married would report happier marriage. But that's not what these data show. You find a decline in the number of people saying that their marriage is very happy. And I think the reason is we have this kind of skewed expectation that we're expecting our partner to be everything for us, and in fact, no one person can do all the things that one human soul needs.
Relationship education. Right. That is what I believe.
What? Right?
We've got another commercial break.
Right now?
Yeah.
Oh, we have another commercial break. I have such a big point to make, too.
Make it after the commercial.
I'll make it after the commercial. We'll be right back.
You want the last few minutes to go here?
So, we're talking about the God Talk. We hate to go to commercial break because we're with this.
That's all that stuff. All that stuff is going on during the commercial.
But my big point before we went on a commercial break was that think about a relationship. Alan was right in terms of it's about a relationship education. It's very important. Let's break it down to just one simple element. Let's say when you have an argument with somebody that you are in a relationship with, in a loving relationship, in an exclusive relationship, you can be married, you can be dating, whatever, or that you're in love with. When you have an argument, what is the thing that sort of drives it for you? And from my experience, this is what it is. You're doing something wrong to irritate me. And the problem is that when we start looking at the argument, we look at it in terms of they're not living up to some kind of standard. They've done something wrong that irritates me. And the problem is that we never stop to think at that point, why does that offend me?
Well,
is it about me or is it about them?
The forgiveness literature, which is very important in marriage, has to do with unrealistic and unenforceable, as they call it, expectations.
Well,
and
sure,
so
absolutely.
you expect something of a partner that's unenforceable, and then the forgiveness literature is really big on that.
I love the way Chuck raises his finger and raises his hand. It's like, I love that. Go ahead.
We never approach it the other way around. What happens if we had the perfect partner? Let's go to the Stepford Wives. We've all seen the Stepford Wives. People can't stand it. A guy can't stand a perfect woman. You need to have someone that is a little bit in your face at times because we're not perfect. The guys aren't perfect either. And there was, this is something that we have to come to grips with. It's kind of having a Nathan, to use a example.
Nathan, you are the man.
Yes.
Does anyone just briefly explain the story of Nathan? King David was caught in adultery. He was.
Didn't he have like 500 wives?
Well, I mean, that's better.
He stole. Yes, he did.
And he stole a married woman.
He stole a married woman, and he had her husband killed in order to cover up the affair. And so Nathan, who is the prophet, comes to him. Instead of telling him, accusing him of adultery, he basically tells him a story about a man with a very lovable and beloved lamb. And that a very rich man then takes the lamb and sacrifices the lamb, and now this poor man is left without a lamb. And David is enraged at this, and he passes judgment on the man. He says, this man deserves death, he deserves the worst treatment, he is offended. And he says, who is that man? And Nathan says to him, you are the man. And all of a sudden, things just fall apart, because now he is now aware of the sin, he now is aware that he has not lived up to the standard, and he is now broken and beaten, and then comes Psalm 51, which is creating me a new heart. Oh God. This is a critical point for all of us, not in his relationships, but as politicians and everything, that we need Nathan.
Well, David never had a power complex after that. He had a power complex up to that actually changed his life after Nathan came at him. And we need Nathans in our lives. I'm speaking as a guy. I need Nathan. I have 3 daughters. I need Nathans in my lives just to keep me on the track. And it's very easy to get caught up in whatever. And so you need just even the little stuff. I mean, dressing up at night. My daughters are all over me. Put on this tie, Dad. You need to look a little bit better. That's important to have people that are Nathans in your life. We never talk about this. The perfect is not the good example to have. And that's one of the things I learned is that you have women's pornography looking for the perfect guy. They don't exist. We need to have Nathans.
No person is perfect.
That's right. That's a very important point. But we're expecting our spouses to be perfect, and we need to let God be God so our spouses can be human. We want our spouses basically to be God for us, and that's not possible.
We ought to go downstairs to the little thing and buy all those magazines at some point and just look at the covers of them. We ought to do it one of these days.
I mean, I think it's a very good point, because what are we saying? What are the visual elements that are showing us what relationships are about and what women should be about? See, this is one of my biggest points, because the Bible says God made them male and female. He doesn't say God made them supermodels and super athletes and chiseled brow. That's not what it's about. And we've created a social construct of what it means to be a woman and what it means to be a man. And it's just not that complicated. And one of the things I think that, let me read some of these here. I always said, if you think I could always get a divorce, okay, this is from D. Shea. in because I always said, if you think I could always get a divorce, you shouldn't get married in the first place. That's a very good point, because people kind of always have their foot out the door because,
Yes. And that's how the no-fault divorce statutes affect everybody's behavior throughout the whole life of the marriage. It doesn't just affect your behavior at the very end. You're calculating the whole time in a way that's not healthy.
Okay, this is from... You have some friends here, Ellen.
I know, I'm shocked.
Dude, take money out of the equation. There were relationships long before there was money in government. Ellen is right and Dr. Yale is right. Okay. Another factor, Sean Leahy, my therapist's wife, had shared the stats on girls and women having been victims of sexual assault. Would this not have a significant effect on the failure of marriages due to residual mental effects on trust?
Oh, no question about it. I'm sure that's right.
Absolutely. This is from Sheila, when marriage is seen as a consumer relationship, we think we can go in and out of it if our needs are not perfectly met. But if we view it as a covenant, we commit to making the marriage what it is supposed to be. There's a very interesting paradigm between the business paradigm and a relationship social paradigm, which is business paradigm says, I buy a product at a certain price from a certain vendor, and if it's not meeting my needs, I can leave. The product really is the center part of the relationship. However, in a covenant relationship and social relationship, if the relationship takes precedent, even if my needs aren't being met, even if I'm not totally happy, even if I'm being kind of almost sacrificial in this relationship, the relationship is key. This is the paradigm switch that we've seen in our modern culture, that we've kind of used the business paradigm to then define our relationship.
It's okay to use the business paradigm, but the biggest problem that I see in counseling individuals that are going through divorce or thinking about divorce or having problems in relationships is it all comes down to your expectations, and it all comes down to the fact that the average person still doesn't understand personal responsibility, that you're responsible for your own life and your own happiness first. No one else is going to make you happy. No one can make you sad. No one can make you any of that. You choose your reaction every single thing that happens to you. So if people have that understanding, and whenever there's a problem, they look at themselves first before they start blaming the relationship or their partner, then I think that would go a huge distance in terms of being able to...
I love it.
I feel like I'm in class.
I know.
I feel like I'm in school.
Chuck raised his hand first.
Okay.
So
we're in God Talk. And one of the things is that that was a very secular approach to it, and I respect that. But in kind of a God Talk, unless you put God first, you're going to screw up your life. And it's because you're creating an idol. And guess what? Idols aren't just wooden. They kick back, and they kick back viciously. And so if we don't get our relationship with God right, that's the biggest problem.
There are going to be a lot of people who say, my relationships are fine, we've had a really long-term relationship, and we don't believe in God. I mean, so it's a very hard kind of thing.
But we're on God Talk, so I brought in kind of, that's the church perspective of it. But, I respect the secular perspective. I think you have more resources from the church to deal with it. I think in the secular world you do not have the real resources to turn the thing around. Because we look at the numbers, and the numbers are all falling apart.
That's my favorite quote, and it comes from I went to a bar mitzvah the other day. Pray as if everything depended on God, and act as if everything depended on you.
That's St. Augustine. That's St. Augustine. Yes, it is.
That's good.
Yeah, that's good. But
just real quick.
Oh, yeah, that's right. She has
my hand up. I taught university for a long time. Okay, I don't like these outbursts. I'm not okay with this. So look at the thing you described at first, the kind of consumer-based situation. I call that Walmart sex. Walmart sex, because we're entitled to mass quantities of low-cost sex. And if we don't like what we get, we get rid of it. We get rid of it, and so we're treating people...
I want that sex at the Avenue sex. That's what I want.
Yeah. Well, you can upgrade. Okay, you can upgrade. But the point is that we're treating other people like objects. That's the problem with this approach. That's what I respectfully disagree with. Part of what you said, I liked a lot of what you said, but just because both people agree to use and be used, I don't think that makes it okay. We're using each other. We've created a culture where I agree that you can use me sexually if you'll let me use you sexually. And I'm saying I don't agree.
The reason why that may not work, and this
people
goes back
a sense of connection.
But this is why.
Of course they do.
And this gets at the heart of why this is God Talk and why this is so tied into believing in God. Because if we believe that we are made in the image of God, and that our true natures and our true happiness only comes from being true to that nature, which is like God, that sentiment of saying, I can, if I agree to get this, if you agree to get that, and we both agree to be used, that is against our nature.
That's right.
And eventually that will come back to haunt us. I don't care what you think and what you feel at that moment. That is against the nature of what we've been made for. And that's why the church needs to probably get more involved in that.
And that's why it's not making us happy. That's why the sexual revolution has been so disappointing in so many ways. That's why these kids up at Yale who are having sex week, they think that more of the same is what's going to make them happy. And really, I think everybody on the panel agrees that you have to back off from
if you ask those kids, is sex going to make you happy? They'd say, no, we're just having fun.
Well, you know, of course they're going to say that. They say that now, and I've heard a lot of young people say that when they're 16 and 17, 18, but when you get them 10 years later, they go, that was really stupid, and it didn't help me. And you know, when I cried at night because, you know, they weren't, because I didn't have the relationship, or they'll have a sex with somebody, some guy they're really in love with, you know, secretly, and he's going to have sex with them because they're offering it, but the guy doesn't really like her.
Right.
And then that's how many women have been caught like that? And you know what? They're not going to talk about it except in a self-help group, and because in a hookup culture, you're supposed to be staunch. You're supposed to be, you know.
But
That's why we have the Let's Strengthen Marriage campaign. We've got the numbers going in the wrong direction. Just like the leading economic indicators tell us something about the economy, this tells us about the state of marriage and the state of the health of this country. We are falling apart, and we've got to start turning this thing around. That's why we have the Let's Strengthen Marriage campaign. That's why we're doing it during National Marriage Week this week.
Correction here, Terry Kay said David didn't hire a person to kill. I probably said hire, but I didn't mean that. He made sure that Bathsheba's husband was in an area with the fiercest fighting, hoping that he would be killed, and he was killed. That's how it happened. He didn't actually hire it, but essentially he had him killed.
They named a hotel after him. I can't believe it.
King David. And she's Jewish, too. I can't believe that. We are just out of time on God Talk. We've had a very spirited and wonderful discussion. I really wanted to get to romance and talk about what we can do to spice our lives romantically and how God can kind of fit into that, but we don't have any time for that.
Dark chocolate.
Yeah, dark chocolate. There you go. So thank you for visiting Thank you very much to our guest, Chuck Stetson, Chairman of Creating the Better Hour, Ellen Ratner, Bureau Chief of Talk Radio News, Dr. Jennifer Morris, head of the Ruth Institute. It's ruthinstitute.org.
Ruthinstitute.org.
So check that out. And Dr. Dale Archer, psychiatrist, drdalearcher.com.
Yes.
All right, thank you very much. This is God Talk. We'll see you again next week.